Respiration. As you breathe in, air enters the trachea. The trachea splits into two primary bronchi. Each bronchus splits into further secondary and tertiary bronchi, leading further into each lung. The bronchi branch into smaller bronchioles. Each bronchiole ends in alveoli or alveolar spaces where gases are exchanged across the alveolo-capillary membranes. The diaphragm, rib cage, and intercostal muscles work together to move air in and out of the lung. Inspiration. External intercostal muscles and diaphragm muscles contract. The rib cage moves up and out and causes the diaphragm to flatten. This increases the volume of the thoracic cavity, causing the pressure to decrease and air to rush in down the pressure gradient. This is an active process that requires energy. Expiration. External intercostal muscles and diaphragm muscles relax. The rib cage moves down and in and causes the diaphragm to become curved. This decreases the volume of the thoracic cavity, causing the pressure to increase and air to go down the pressure gradient. Lung function measurements. Tidal volume. The volume of air in each breath, usually about half a liter for adults. Ventilation rate. The number of breaths per minute. For a healthy person at rest, this is around 15 breaths per minute. Forced expiratory rate. The maximum volume of air that can be breathed out in 1 second. Forced vital capacity. The maximum volume of air it is possible to breathe forcefully out of the lungs after taking a deep breath in. Lung diseases. Pulmonary tuberculosis, TB. When someone becomes infected with TB bacteria, immune system cells build a wall around the bacteria in the lungs to form small hard lumps called tubercles. Infected tissue within the tubercle dies and the gaseous exchange surface is reduced so that the tidal volume is decreased. A reduced tidal volume means less air can be inhaled. To compensate for this, patients have to increase their ventilation rate. Symptoms include persistent cough, coughing up blood or mucus, chest pains, shortness of breath, and fatigue. Pulmonary fibrosis. Pulmonary fibrosis is the formation of scar tissue in the lungs. This can be the result of infection or exposure to substances like asbestos or dust. Scar tissue is thicker and less elastic than regular lung tissue. This means the lungs are less able to expand and cannot hold as much air. There is also a reduction in gaseous exchange as diffusion is slower across a thicker scarred alveolo-capillary membrane. A reduced tidal volume and vital capacity means less air can be inhaled. To compensate for this, patients have to increase their ventilation rate. Symptoms include chest pain, fatigue and weakness, shortness of breath, and dry cough. Asthma. Airways become inflamed and irritated, usually because of an allergic reaction to pollen or dust. During an asthma attack, the smooth muscles lining the bronchioles contract and a large amount of mucus is produced. This causes constriction of the airways, making it difficult to breathe because airflow is severely reduced. This means the forced expiratory volume is severely reduced. Symptoms include shortness of breath, wheezing, and tight chest. Emphysema. It is caused by smoking or long-term exposure to air pollution. Foreign particles in the smoke or in the air become trapped in the alveoli. This causes inflammation, which attracts phagocytes to the area. The phagocytes produce an enzyme that breaks down elastin in the alveoli walls. Loss of elastin means the alveoli cannot recoil or expel air as well. It also eventually leads to the destruction of the alveolar walls, which reduces the surface area for gas exchange. Symptoms include shortness of breath, increased ventilation rate, wheezing. Hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a large protein made up of 4 polypeptide chains joined together, quaternary structure. Each chain has a heme group, which contains an iron ion. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 oxygen molecules, so it has a higher affinity for oxygen. In the lungs, oxygen binds to the hemoglobin in red blood cells to form oxyhemoglobin. Near the body cells, oxygen dissociates from the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen depends on the partial pressure of oxygen. High partial pressure of oxygen, high PO2, results in oxygen loading onto hemoglobin. Low partial pressure of oxygen, low PO2, results in oxyhemoglobin unloading its oxygen. Dissociation curves. When the first oxygen molecule binds to the hemoglobin changes shape in a way that makes it easier for more oxygen molecules to bind. However, as the hemoglobin becomes saturated, it becomes harder for the oxygen to bind again. This explains why the gradient of the graph is steeper in the middle of the graph, because this is where oxygen can load and unload more easily. Bohr effect. Hemoglobin loads at low pCO2 levels. Oxyhemoglobin unloads its oxygen at high pCO2. This results in the curve shifting to the right because of high pCO2 and less oxygen, which will load and unload more easily. This results in the curve shifting to the right because at high pCO2, less oxygen will load and more will unload. One more thing to mention before we end this video is tissue fluid. Tissue fluid surrounds the cells in tissues. It consists of small molecules that leave the blood plasma like water, oxygen, and nutrients. At the start of the capillary bed, nearest to the arteries, the hydrostatic pressure in the capillaries is greater than in the tissue fluid. This forces fluid out of the capillaries into the tissue. As fluid leaves the capillaries, the hydrostatic pressure drops. Therefore, the hydrostatic pressure in the capillaries at the end nearest the veins is lower than in the tissues. Some water enters the capillaries by osmosis as a result. Excess tissue fluid is drained out by the lymphatic system, then transported back into the circulatory system. Tissue fluid is an essential part of our bodies, and it allows for the exchange of different substances in something known as the capillary loop, which simply allows for the interconnection between your body's network of veins and arteries. Thank you for your patience.